Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's me, Jack, here at the Socialyetdistanced podcast. And today we got a really special day. It could be so much fun that you guys get left out of the mix because me and Tony might run off and have cocktails or something. But anyway, in lieu of that, we're going to talk with Toni Nagy, who is a stand-up comedian and content creator, and she's most known for all those viral videos that I put on the homepage all the time now. She does interpretive dance. She talks about her philosophies while she's pontificating, gyrating, squirming around like a little weasel. And she does promote a quasi radical, pseudo-philosophical, and somewhat existential, but mostly funny persona and presentation in her work. Being with Toni is kind of like microdosing mushrooms, and then an hour you start to wonder, was that really a microdose? I'm not sure or not, but it's fun. So let's go dive into it. We're going to talk to Toni, and hope you guys enjoy this. Thanks. Toni Nagy. Hi, Toni.
How you doing?
I'm good. Rock and roll. How are you today?
I'm actually doing well. I'm in an okay mood, so that's good.
That's good. How do you define a good mood? I don't fuck around.
Like hopeful, a little more hopeful, like less feeling of dread. Not necessarily in the space of self-loathing, but like a little bit like, oh wow, maybe some things are possible. I think that would be like good.
Yeah, I think if I turn the laser on myself, I'd probably agree with you. It's the rest of the world. I'm really starting to believe the shit that everybody else is crazy and it's not me, but feeling relief from that in any capacity at this point is a good thing. I know you have some particular beliefs about those kind of things. You can expound as much or as little as you choose to do that. So tell me a little bit about your journey, though. I mean, I know that once upon a time you did some writing and things like that. But how do you end up being a half-naked, gyrating glowworm on the screen?
I don't know if I'm half naked. I think I'm mostly clothed.
Yeah, but I'm baiting the audience.
Yeah, okay. I think if you were to see me naked, I'm usually in a man's suit wearing a man's skin. I'm like, I don't know.
Which is extremely funny, I might add.
Yeah, I do enjoy a good man suit. I think it's you didn't ask that, but I do think it's interesting, like being in a woman's body and how you use your body or your beauty to participate in your work. And as a comedian, I don't think that when you are your most beautiful, you are your most funny. So there is a way in which I'm always kind of examining the role of beauty and how to abandon that social pressure in order to prioritize and focus on humor versus like attractiveness.
Yeah, and you do that very, very well. I mean, the fact that you're attractive just is, but what originally attracted me to you to begin with was the kind of silliness. It wasn't the femininity, it was the silliness that drew me into what you were actually saying. And
yeah,
that's when it becomes educational to me.
Yeah, that's kind of my goal. I mean, someone once called me disarming, and I thought that was a really interesting adjective, because I don't think if you're like necessarily like being seduced, you are open-hearted, like you are being drawn to someone because there's a seduction involved. But when I think of like the concept of silliness or disarmingness, I think of the potential or the possibility of creating a space where someone feels comfortable to open their hearts and open their minds, which is something I'm more interested in. I'm not as interested in as attraction. Like people being attracted is not compelling to me.
Well, people that if that's what draws them and keeps them, it's as hollow as anything else, anywhere else. You're getting. It's just like sitting at a bar and some guy's hitting on you all night. He's not really offering anything other than he's hitting on you that night.
Right.
And
It's a type of attention, but
yeah,
it's
you don't want your audience to be that guy.
no, I really don't. I really don't. It's not it's just not compelling.
Not at all.
I'm like, that's not the revolution, bro.
Yeah. Oh, you're one of those manly men. Okay.
Okay, all right, cool.
Okay.
Um, yeah, so but you would ask me, I think the truth is I've been making media and content in a variety of forms for many, many years. And I've just been trying different methodologies and practices and experimentation of like what are interesting, compelling, entertaining ways to philosophize. I mean, I think that's my ultimate objective, is to have a philosophical inquiry on existence. And I think that humor, I mean, a lot of people do, it's like humor is this tactic to have conversations where you can kind of present things in a way where you're like, well, I'm not serious. There is like a poetic and an artistic license where you can push boundaries and you're in a way less accountable, which I enjoy because I like to be pushing boundaries. And I'm not saying that everything I'm believing and thinking and pontificating on is the universal truth. I don't know. I'm just asking questions, And so I think comedy provides me a blanket of which to wrap myself in, where I can ask all the questions I want. And, and that's my contribution to society, is the questions. I'm not positioning myself as an expert, because I think I don't know, I'm not really into guru worship, and I'm not really into experts, even though I do believe there are people who are experts at things.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. When you talk like you're the expert, I'm always like, are you though?
Yeah, and why if that's the case, why did you feel obligated to tell me that?
Yeah. Even though like I do really appreciate people's wisdom, it's more like the hierarchy of conversation. I enjoy a conversation that's dialectic, that is a give and take, because I do believe that everybody that's participating in the conversation is adding value to it. I mean, like, so for example, I am a teacher, and when I'm teaching, people are paying me to be giving them a service, which is teaching, right? So it's not like I can be like, well, what do you think we should do? But I do have a class that is, what are your needs today? Where's your emotions at? Like, is there something specific you want to work on? Like, I am bringing in potential for feedback. And then when I choreograph work with the class, so in a dance class, which is what I teach, usually the class ends with choreography. And I used to just like bring my choreography to class, where like I would work something out previously, and then I'd be like, this is what I've choreographed. And then I would teach it to people. But then, I don't know, maybe like 6 or 7 years ago, I just kind of started choreographing just in the room with the class. So I have no idea what I'm going to do. I'll pick a song, or I'll let even a student pick a song if someone's feeling like particularly passionate about a song. And even though I am the one that's choreographing, I am tapping into the collective energy of everyone that's in the room. And I'm feeling how it feels with them, and I'm feeling what it feels like in their body. And sometimes I'm like, oh, this doesn't feel good in this collective body. Let's try like this instead. And so it really reminded me that even if I am like leading as a teacher in quotation marks, the process of choreography is a collaborative effort that I'm doing with the quantum energy of everyone in the room. And so it feels like there is this like shared ownership of the work at the end of it, even though I'm the one who's like, do this.
Sure. And I think the end result is it's also an actual demonstration of a dance. because I mean, intellectually, that's what we do. We do these dances in our heads, and we spar sometimes, and sometimes we communicate, and sometimes we just throw our hands up. But in that environment that you've described, it gets back to universal, where everybody has what their needs are that day. They all come together and say, okay, this is what our needs are. Okay, we'll apply this and see if it works or not. And then it either works or it doesn't. You modify it and adapt it for everybody so that everybody learns from that process, and the choreography as well. Because
Yeah, and the limitations
they're
of
not
other
going to,
people can be
right.
interesting.
Yeah, exactly. And they're not feeling like they left out. They're left out because they didn't get their way. They're feeling like they've grown even more, I would suspect, because they did something outside of the box that they expected, you know.
Yeah, and they were energetically involved in the artistic creation of something,
Right.
even if they don't say a word, just
Right.
by being in the room while I'm coming up with it, is they're involved. I mean, I
Right.
think that's the thing with like an improv show. If you were to do an acting improv show, the energy of the people in the audience are participating in the show, whether they might just, whether they call out, like banana or whatever the hell, just them watching, just their energy, just their thoughts. There's so much telepathic
Mm-hmm.
conversation that's happening. Like, who knows why you come up with whatever you're coming up with, whatever in front of whatever audience. Like, there is an alchemy that happens when you co-create in space with people.
Absolutely. And as an I think that part of the motive is you don't really have an expectation for what the audience gets from it either, because their own experiences are going to be different. It's like I watch my friend Fran, who teaches, she's a PhD in poetry and teaches kids in London, right? Some of these kids just light up at the thought of being involved in that creative process, and others don't. They have other things. But I've just kind of watched that process, and I'm not saying it's limited to young only. I'm just saying I've seen it there. You know, that just hitting that chemical spark, wherever it comes from, whether it's dance or the philosophy or the process itself, wherever that comes from, there's a payoff for everybody. And I can't sit in some power or some position of power control and assume what their needs really are and what they're going to walk away with. I can paint it the best way I want, but can I really? It sounds like you can. I mean, and I see it happen all the time. You know, I had a halfway house full of junkies. They all didn't use dope for a long time. There's
Mm-hmm.
why, and a part of it was the alchemy. Just like you're saying, which is kind of a funny thing to say about a bunch of junkies, but yeah.
Yeah, well, alchemy is like a crucial part of existence, which is why people turn to drugs. I
Yeah,
mean,
exactly. Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. I think you're doing a great job with carrying your message. It's exciting to me that you have those results and that you look for more different ways to engage.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, the driving force is around this concept of sharing the self. Because, I do hear a lot of people talk, especially in the circles that I'm following on different social media, this concept of like, wake up, you got to wake other people up, and I'm just like, what? No, actually, to even the hubris to think that you could wake anyone else up, that's pretty arrogant, like,
Yeah.
really all you can do is open your own eyes, and then share your journey. And who knows if your eyes are fully open or not, but if you share a journey, that's valuable because you're sharing a journey. And I think that the collective consciousness, we all are experiencing, the palette of emotion. So when we share ourselves and we share our journey, we're just connecting to the emotional journey of what it is to be human. And I think that is what people, will connect to. And then when we feel connected to others, to the self, to the land, to animals, to plants, that connection, I think, is the medicine for dis-ease and ailments and suffering and sadness and depression and anxiety and all that, stuff.
I agree 100%. And, many wise people in my life have told me virtually the same thing in different words many, many times. And at some point I finally heard it. And I'm very, very grateful for that day. And I take it as a responsibility to the miracles I've seen in my life to be responsive and to share those things. But I have an ego too that sometimes slips where it doesn't belong and has that hubris that you speak about, and it's because I'm an evangelist about what worked for me.
Yeah.
That's the part I forget, is it was for me, that
Yeah,
worked.
I relate to that.
Yeah. So it is what it is, but I think you're absolutely right that the clarify or the closing end of that alchemy is you have to give it away or it's not worth anything.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah. Well,
that,
actually, I go back to the word sharing versus giving only because I had a conversation about this earlier today. Because giving is like, I give you the cake and now I have no cake. But sharing is, we're sharing cake. So we share the self, we share these things, because then you are maintaining like your own connection to it. Because there's the other like kind of martyrdom that happens with giving, I was like, oh yeah, giving versus sharing. I was just talking about this today and I was like, because I'm trying to like really hone in what my own like personal, like spiritual, psychological, philosophical
tell me about it,
missions
sister.
are.
I know.
And
Believe
I'm
me.
like, no, it's not about giving yourself. It's about sharing yourself, because sharing implies like mutual, enjoyment. Yeah.
Where I get confused in looking at it that way, and because I do agree with you, but it's that ego part that you mentioned earlier. It's like I end up being just pissed off. Well, what you didn't see how much I was giving you?
That's why giving is more complicated than sharing, right? Because when you share, you're like, but I still have stuff for myself. I think just like I like to think in terms of cakes, I still have cake. So even though you ate half the cake, I still have half the cake. So I'm okay.
Well, and I'm very comfortable in the fact that it's my roommate's birthday and they're in the kitchen making a cake right this minute. Yes.
Oh, that's fun. Scorpio.
Yeah, believe me. So again, I don't know that that answers how you end up on stage.
Oh, how I ended up on stage. I mean, it started off with me just being a writer and really kind of devoted to that process. And a friend of mine was like, "Oh, you should submit one of your stories to this podcast called Risk, because they're going to be in the area." And I'm just like of a little bit of a generation where like I don't like look everything up on the internet. I didn't grow up with the internet.
Right,
So there's
right.
this like kind of like weird kind of where I'm like, oh yeah, okay, a podcast. Like this was a while ago. This was, I mean 10 years ago or something, or 9 years ago. And I was like, yeah, sure, podcast. And like for me, for some reason, like a storytelling podcast, I just like envisioned in my head a poetry slam, like people wearing like berets and being like, hey, the crows. And I'm like, cool. So like I submitted my story to this podcast, and then they were like, yeah, we would have you on. And they like gave me the time and the address. And I was like, okay, cool. Again, didn't even like look up where I was going. Like all of these things that I didn't do. And then I get to the event and it's at Laugh Boston, which is like one of the biggest like comedy venues in Boston. And it's the last day of like the Women's Comedy Festival. And there's like 200 people in the audience. And I'm like, I've never even spoken into a fucking microphone. I'm like, wait, what the fuck is happening? And so like the guy, his name's Kevin Allison, who like was the host of the podcast, super nice guy. I'm like, hey, yeah. So like, and he's like trying to get ready for his show. And like, I'm in the green room and I'm like, oh yeah, excuse me, sir. Like, I've ever actually like never spoken into a microphone before and I'm having a panic attack. And he was like, what the fuck? He was like, why the hell why are you here? Like, he was super nice. I just underneath it, I think he was like, why did you apply to do this? Because everyone else was like a professional comic or storyteller.
Right.
And he was just like perplexed. But he was very polite. He was like, oh, you'll be okay. And I'm like, wait, so like, do you take the mic out of the stand? Like, how do you do that? And he was just like, please, no more questions from you. So then like one of the women that was like gonna be performing, she was like pretty nice. And she was just like, kind of told me a couple things and I was just like really flipping out. I was like, what the fuck have I done? Like, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? And then, but it was a story I had told before, it's not like I
Yeah.
knew the story. So anyway, then I get on stage and like the second I was on stage, I was like, oh yeah. I'm like, this is correct, and I did a great job. Like, I actually think I did a really good job. It was a total like beginner's luck kind of thing. And then I was like, oh, I should do stand up, like so arrogant, I was like, yeah, I should just like do stand up. I'm a natural, I think I was like, I'm amazing. I'm a natural at this. So like, then, I think I went to an open mic. I mean, this is so rude, but I went to an open mic and it was like 98% guys in their 20s.
Sure.
And I was like, what? And I was like, all right, and it was all, I mean, like if you go to an open mic, a comedy open mic, it's usually just all comics. And they were just all just like 20-year-old dudes. And I was like, this isn't really my vibe. I think I went to like 2 or 3. I was like, I'm not into this open mic scene. So then I just like lied. I just would like, I would just like write bookers and I would like submit myself to contests and I just lied. I was like, yeah, I've been doing comedy for 5 years, and they'd be like, where? And I'd be like, Ohio, I would just like, I just lied. And then I like got on this contest and I did really well in the contest. And so then I got this like residency in New York to perform like for 6 or 8 weeks or something like that. And then I did that and I was so like manic and like I was like, I'm gonna write a new set every time I perform. So like literally like every time I performed, I wrote like a new 7 or 8 minute set. Like never performed the same thing twice. Like did that for a while. And I think I had like such like a, it was like I was like a baby AI where like I wasn't really like online yet. So I was just like I was like very fearless. And then there was just like one day where like my grandmother had just died. I had just like filmed like my first film that like I directed and it was like a really long, like month-long process. And then I had a show like right after that. And I go to the show and like it was like such an epic bomb. It was like my first bomb and it was like performance art, like literally like the crowd was like silent. And I had 2 friends come. We went out for dinner afterwards and like the friend was like she was like, well, it's like the point of comedy isn't always to make people laugh. And I was like, I think that's actually the exact point of comedy. I was like, but like, thank you for like.
One thing I do know is it's not to resuscitate the dead people at the tables.
Well, the other thing that was really interesting is like after my complete bomb, the guy after me did really well. I mean, granted, he had like a lot of fart material, but like he had to like pull the audience like back. Like he worked really hard to like reestablish their joy that I had just like taken from them, And that also taught me like very early on, I was like, there's no such thing as a bad audience. It's like, you're just not connected to them. And like, I knew I wasn't connected to them, but rather than like addressing it or dealing with it, I just like kept like just going down the whole of like my material. And so that's why I felt like then I like was AI that suddenly become like aware of itself, you know? Then I was like fucked up for years performing after that. Like, so no longer was I arrogant. No longer was I just like this like mega confident person. I was self-aware AI, you know, and shows could go really bad or they could go really good. I never knew what was going to happen. It always felt like really out of my control. Like I felt I had a lot of performance anxiety. Things just felt so volatile for, you know, the next like 7 or 8 years, you know, like a while of like throwing myself out there. But like, you know, comedy, I think that I laugh at my arrogance of my beginning, but it was important to be that arrogant because like
Yeah, you
it
needed
like
that.
I needed that. And then I was like very severely humbled by years and years and years and years. And then it got to a point where my performance anxiety was so bad that I was like, fuck, I think I'm actually like pushing away shows because I dread them so much. Like I did this show. That was my first show, like my first show that I was like headlining and doing and produced and directed and organized and like had to deal with the theaters. Like it was so stressful. And I was like, in the midst of that, I was like, oh, right. Like, this is why people don't do this. Like, this is fucking a lot. You know, like I know it was a lot. That, you know, are people going to come? Is it this, that? It was like 175 seated theater. Like, I was like fucked up. I think I lost like a couple years of like my life in the amount of anxiety and stress I felt for that show. And so after that, I was just like, this is not good, you know? Like I have to reimagine my relationship to performance. And I think it was after that, like maybe it was before, but maybe I think it was after I did mushrooms. And my intention for the mushroom was to find joy when I perform. And that really helped.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's, yeah, that's did you tour a lot like outside of the local region?
Well, I performed, yeah, I mean, like I performed in New York and Boston and Connecticut and New Hampshire and Vermont and Maine, like all of New England and then LA and um yeah, but like I have to book myself and you know,
Right.
find a club. Do you want me? Am I worthy of love? And then, you know, it's a constant hustle. You're always like you book a bunch of shows and then are you going to dread those shows? Are you going to experience them fully? And then you have to do the shows and you have to book more shows. Like I'm right now booking my spring of next year, you know, like it's a lot of putting yourself out there again and again and again and again.
Yeah, I would imagine so. I got some buddies that are probably a couple of years ahead of where you are in their success in that realm. I'll send you some info because they're buddies enough that I could tell them to talk to you.
Yeah, cool. I always need some buddies to talk
Yeah,
to
always
further my success.
everybody needs buddies, and
Everybody needs some buddies. Yeah.
they're good enough that they always need people around them as well, or you know, podcast guests, or come up with a special, you know, 10 episode deal that they do or whatever. But I mean, they're for real. So we'll talk about that offline. So I'm just bragging, that's all.
Yeah, I like a little bragging.
So what do you got going on now though? I mean, from now forward, where do you see yourself going? I mean, in your career right this minute?
So I think for like a while, my objective was just about like getting up on stage and, you know, building a name for myself. Um, because there's two worlds. There's the internet and then there's like your life
Sure.
on the planet, you know, and I think for me, the internet stuff, you know, I've been making videos, like I said, for like a really long time. And I love making videos. Like I love making I love making films. Like filmmaking is really interesting to me. I love editing. I like making music videos for other people. Like I taught myself how to edit and like I've made some really dope music videos. I gotta say, I'm really proud of them. Like I think I'm a good editor and I've enjoyed that process. But there's something about like live shows that I've been like just think oh well, the thing about, the entertainment business is that it's a business. And what do? I'm an anti-corporate fucking like
Exactly.
anarchist, and I'm like, so who wants to sponsor my anti-corporate message? Like you were saying before we talked about monetizing, and I'm like, you think that I've fucking monetized myself? Like, I have not been able to just like deep throat whatever corporate dick I'm supposed to do that, because my whole message is the opposite. So there's that like journey I've been on. But also like we live in a capitalist society, and the amount of fucking work I've put out like for free is mind-boggling. So
no, it's not. Believe me.
yeah, I mean, there's a really awesome, I think it's Jillian Welch who sang the original song where everything is free, and it's like just about the it's such a beautiful fucking song. I recommend it to any artist, or any person. Everyone's an artist. But oh yeah, so it's like, how can I have control of my own career and over my own messaging? Is just like to just keep being my own advocate and promoter. And so I've been doing these live shows. I have 2 live shows and then one that I'm working on. So one live show is about parenting. It's called Go to Your Womb, which I think is a pretty clever.
Did I see an ad or a link or something for that?
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah. I've done that show a couple of times. I'm touring it, so it's going to keep happening. It's with me and my daughter, who's 13. And it's really looking at parenting and trauma and intergenerational trauma, but through the lens of like comedy and dance and clown and all sorts of things. It's like a very interactive show. And just doing a show with my 13-year-old daughter is bananas. It was a really interesting process of like working on that show together and performing it with her. I just think that and I'm really just looking at like the trauma of being parented, basically, and how like we are all so traumatized by being parented. And if we were to really face that trauma of our childhood, I do think we would be in a completely different world. And so like part of the work is around examining and picking at the scabs that we have around how we were parented. So that's one show. Another show I wrote and I'm like now starting to tour is called Men Come Inside of Me. And I also think that's a really good title. So I pat myself on the back yet again. See, we can tap into my ego arrogance with my titles that I'm so proud of. So Men Come Inside of Me is just about like these like kind of like 5 archetypal men who I like present on stage like as characters. And am I like putting a spotlight on a certain sense of like toxic whatever masculinity? Sure. But between each character, I become myself and talk about why I relate to that guy, and that guy actually lives inside of me. He's like a part of me, which is why it's called Men Come Inside of Me. So it's kind of like looking at like masculine archetypes, but then like me deconstructing my relationship to these masculine archetypes and how I personally also embody these masculine archetypes, and also like just the societal kind of like confusion around feminine and masculine archetypes that we're always both kind of being pressured to fit into in different ways. And so that one's about like really building compassion for these like archetypal psychologies that I absolutely think we all kind of experience this on a different spectrum. And then the third show I'm working on, since you ask, is called Grape Culture. And it's a tragic comedy about rape culture. And I'm doing that with a friend of mine named Sarah Buckner. And that one, I mean, I just don't think there's enough comedy about rape. So that one's really looking at rape. There's this like, I'm just sorry, rape culture is culture. Like rape is period.
Circumcision. How come we don't get to talk about circumcision?
you do get to talk about circumcision, and it is a complete sexual assault and physical mutilation. It's a big fucking problem. Yeah. So like that is part of rape culture. Like I honestly think all of culture is rape culture. And so that's kind of looking at all the ways in which like capitalism, the prison industrial complex, our relation, the medical industrial complex, like how our bodies are out on the chopping blocks of capitalism to be raped constantly, and then how the whole scientific method and whole the scientific theory, which was founded by Francis Bacon, is all, you know, formed from his thinking and his thought patterning around raping nature and how nature is supposed to be dominated. And his whole, like, basically the father of science is talking about like nature rape, you know? So, and then obviously with the war that we're seeing right now and the violence that's happening, like rape is a huge part of it. And I mean, I could go on and
I mean,
I could do an hour and a half show about rape, which is what I'm going to do, but in the language of comedy, you know? And I think that I think comedy is a really important way to talk about rape, because we talk about rape as if it's not happening all the time.
right. Yeah, you know, and it's funny. I mean, I certainly agree with everything you say, but I also think about, like, I am the guy who will sit here and bend your ear for 45 minutes about some emotional distress or psychological distress I'm, you know, having at that particular moment, be crying, you know, basically having a panic attack, the whole fucking shebang. And at the end, I'll make a joke like,
Yeah.
"Oh, I'm just kidding about all that."
Yeah.
What the fuck is that about? That's because I got circumcised, I think.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I also think it's about like, you know, the yin and yang of life. It's like if we just sit in trauma as if trauma is only supposed to be expressed through like this very serious like modality, I don't think that's honoring like how trauma is actually like a collective experience that we are all collectively constantly digesting, and
But
like to
daily, it's
just
getting worse. Daily, it gets worse, and people don't even notice it.
yes, and to just think everything has to be one tone. Like there's they did this like kind of study thing or whatever in Rwanda, like after the genocide, where they sent all these psychiatrists over to Rwanda, and they were, you know, the intention was like, oh, we'll give psychotherapy to these Rwandan people, and that's going to help them deal with like the massacres that they just experienced. And a lot of the people were like, what? Like, I don't want to get into a fucking room with like fake lights and talk about my problems. I want to go outside. I want to dance. I want to drum. I want to like remember why life is worth living. I want to sing. Like they were like not resonating with talk therapy at all as a means of quote unquote trauma release. So, I mean, laughter is trauma release.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that it's, I've always called it a pressure valve. It's my pressure valve at the end that lets off the rest of the steam so I can be done with it.
Yeah. Yeah. I
It
agree.
doesn't always end up that way, but that's kind of a way I've noticed it as a defense mechanism. That's what I'm doing, actually, you know.
It's a defense mechanism, and it's a protection mechanism, and it's a
Yep.
healing mechanism. It's
Yep.
not
And I
just
know
one
it
thing.
because I've done the work. I know exactly where it comes from too, which is a
Mm-hmm.
fortunate thing.
Yeah.
Wow. You know, Tony, I could talk with you forever. You know, just one on one. I don't want to bastardize your time anymore. And I know you got things to do as well later. So um, you know, unless you've got something you want to pimp or sell or harp, you know, please let the folks know how they can get a hold of you and whatnot. And then we'll call it an early night.
Yay. Okay. Yeah. My website is toninaj.com, TONINAGY. So all information is there.
Cool. Well, you
Yeah.
guys go and visit Tony. And until then, I'll see you guys on the next time. Thank you and goodbye.